Again, some people do,
Mhm.
and like I would advise like clients to, take on some protein after a run and things like
Yeah.
that to help with their recovery and to avoid injuries. But um, at the end of the day, if you train sensibly and don't overdo things and don't be stupid, then the chances of injury are pretty low. Not impossible, of course, um, but if you do things in the right way, then you shouldn't really hurt yourself. So, um, touch wood, like everyone, I'll get the odd little niggle here and there, but um, very rarely do I get anything which will stop me running. So, um, and that's not through any special diet or anything like that. So, I think that the training is more important than what you eat.
Okay. And you mentioned don't overdo it. Now you guys are running 100 miles plus. Like what would the
Yeah,
definition of
yeah,
overdo it be exactly?
yeah. That's probably a bit of a silly thing to say. It depends on the individual. So, I'm more talking about in training rather than in an actual event. So, quite often I'll get someone that will come to me to be coached, and I'll actually reduce their weekly mileage to from what they've been doing previously, which comes as a bit of a surprise to them. But a lot of people overtrain, whether it's for a half marathon or for 100-mile race. They A lot of people do too much, and what happens is they'll be standing on that start line. Take London Marathon for example. There's everyone standing on that start line, and a massive, massive percentage of people, um, they might think they've trained brilliantly because they've been doing loads of miles every week. But what happens is they're standing on that start line, they feel amazing, but they've actually completely exhausted themselves. They're totally run down because they've trained too
Mm.
much, and they might only discover this 18, 20 miles into the race. You hear people talking about the wall is a very common thing to talk about in marathon racing. And a lot of these guys, they've just trained too much. Um, so you got to, and for each individual, it's different. So that's kind of where I earn my money as a coach in learning all about my clients and their, because you've got to take into account all the different situations as well. So, for example, someone who doesn't work and doesn't have any kids, they might be able to train a bit harder than someone that works 10 hours on a building site every day and has five kids at
Yeah.
home, um, because that second person is going to be knackered anyway. Um, so there's all these things to take into consideration, and that's kind of where I earn my money as a coach. Because those two extreme examples, you've got the guy who doesn't have any kids and doesn't work very much, and the guy that has five kids and works 12 hours a day or whatever it might be. If they just Google marathon training plan and they both get the same plan, they're going to get a very different
Yeah, of
outcome.
course they are.
Um, so that's where it's important to learn about the individual, and it can vary massively from person to
Of
person.
course. And
Um,
with
but
sorry, go on.
I've got sorry to interrupt. I've got clients that know each other, um, and they kind of get a bit baffled sometimes as to why they might be training for the same race, but their plans are quite different. Um, and that can be quite baffling, I guess, until I explain the reason why.
Right, and I imagine it's especially baffling when they end up trying to compare regimes, and they probably try and inspire each other, and especially if they come across the same regime, it's got to be quite disheartening at times. But you
Yeah,
mentioned obviously you're overtraining, and would especially not just from a training point of view, but I suppose from a mental strength point of view as well. I suppose that probably makes a lot of sense from a lifestyle perspective. How do you what do you do with regards to mental strength training? Because mate, I mean, I keep going for 5 or 6K, and then suddenly the proverbial wall kicks in, and I want to be back at home. I want it to be nice and warm.
Yep. Yep.
I want my
Yeah.
protein shake. I
Yeah.
want my fried eggs. I want
Yep.
my coffee.
Yep. So in kind of direct to give you a direct answer to your situation just explained there, part of the problem is you've convinced yourself that that's going to happen. So and then you make it happen. So you're out for your 10K run or whatever it is. You almost before you've even stepped out the door, you know after 6 or 7K that you're going to want to be finished. Does that make
It does
sense?
indeed.
Because you've kind of talked yourself into it. So um, that's, I guess, the number one trick, and it's kind of easier said than done. It takes a lot of practice. Is not I kind of tell people not to dwell on distance. So to give an extreme example, if I'm doing a 100-mile run, 100-mile race, I will not look at the distance very much at all. So I will easily get to halfway and probably have looked at my watch once. Um, Obviously, I've got a good idea of what distance I'm at, but there's just no point like dwelling on the distance um, because then all the demons start coming in, which aren't going to help. So um, I do a lot of pacing for people doing 100-mile races, and one strategy that I do, which works quite well, and it would work even if you're doing a 5K race, is I tell them not to dwell on the halfway point, because what often happens is you kind of get to halfway, and whether you're doing a 5K or a 5,000K race, you have that little kind of halfway celebration. Yeah, I'm halfway, which I urge people to not do that, because what happens then is you get a massive low afterwards, because once you're over that little celebratory period of getting halfway, you suddenly realize, shit, I've got to do the same distance again. And that's where the demons come in and you start to get tired. So you almost talk yourself into being
No,
tired.
you're absolutely right. Yeah.
So a little trick that I do with clients when I'm pacing them is right up to, so from, call it 50 miles right up to maybe 80, 85 miles. If they ask me how far
Sorry,
have we
pal.
gone, I'll,
Yeah,
is it
just we
is it
got
working?
to. Yeah, you are now, but just I got to a little trick that and then all the gold was deleted.
So a little trick, if I've got a client who's doing a 100-mile race, um, is between halfway and 80, even 90 miles, if they ask me, if I'm pacing them and they ask me, how far have we gone? How far have we gone? I would just kind of be quite blasé about it and say, didn't I
No, no,
working?
no, no. Sorry, I was just saying, be quite
It's working.
blasé,
Oh, yeah,
ignore
yeah,
it.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll get to the punchline in a minute. And say, yeah, we're halfway, mate. We're halfway. Even if we're 80 miles in, oh, we're only halfway. Don't worry about it. Let's keep going, sort of thing. Because it kind of keeps that psychological demon away.
Hmm.
And then you suddenly get to 90 miles and it's like, right, we've only got 10 miles to go. Come on, we can do this. And then it's like, oh, shit, yeah, I can do this. So there's all these little tricks that you can do. They take practice, of course, and not everything works for everyone. But yeah, you can talk yourself into being tired.